I'm archiving every distortion. I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I'm pulling off your masks.
Some leaders stay hidden behind walls. Others choose to walk among their people. One morning in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the palace gates. Not behind an armored motorcade, but on foot. He had his guards behind him at a distance as he strolled freely through the streets. These strolls were his means of taking the pulse of the country. The cries of street vendors, children's laughter resounding between stalls, motorbikes cutting through traffic, and the acrid smell of charcoal, roasted meat blending with dust in the air. Here he wasn't simply a president behind dark glass. He was a man among men, and then, at the edge of the central market, he paused. In the shadow of a baobab tree sat an old man on a crude bench. His tattered clothes had been worn paper, thin from years of wear, stitched with layers of patches. But what hit Traoré wasn't poverty, it was recognition. The stance, the serene presence, the book in his lap, memories flooded back. This was Professor Ismail, the instructor who once dominated a small room with teachings on justice, dignity, and ethics. The instructor who had said to his students, "Knowledge is the only wealth no one can steal." Now, this same instructor sat motionless amidst the cacophony of the marketplace, reading as the world whizzed by. Traoré's chest constricted. He moved closer. "Professor Ismail." The old man glanced up, bewildered, then instantly recognized him. "Ibrahim." "Yes, it is I." A faint smile crept onto his lips as he attempted to sit up, but his legs folded beneath him. Traoré caught him quickly, noting how weak he had grown. "It has been too long, Professor," he said gently. Ismail's eyes shone. "And too many things have changed except you. You still walk among the people." His voice cracked. "Mr. President, I never imagined." "Don't call me President," Traoré broke in with a smile. "To me, you'll always be my teacher." But when he asked him what had happened, Ismail's grin lost its sparkle. His eyes fell to the ground. "My home was seized when debts became too burdensome. 40 years of service, and my pension can't even sustain me for a month. Prices only increase. But our pensions remain frozen, like we're old relics that no one wants. I ventured into teaching children, but my health betrayed me. Eventually, I even sold my books. Yes, can you imagine? A teacher selling his own books to make ends meet?" Traoré gritted his jaw. He realized that this was not only his professor's tragedy, it was the tale of many overlooked teachers, nurses, and civil servants throughout the country. And then, in a quivering voice, Ismail whispered, "To Professor Ismail, the toughest thing wasn't hunger, or even the cold nights. It was invisibility. Former students, colleagues, even parents of kids that I used to teach. They pass me by like I am nothing. I became a ghost in the same streets where I used to be respected." His voice shook. "There were nights when I wondered, if I wasted my life, did all those years amount to nothing? When society rejects you, you come to feel that you were never anything to begin with." Traoré's eyes blazed. This was the same man who taught him that dignity resides within every human being, independent of wealth or power. And now, he was admitting that the world took his away. Traoré tightened his fists, his voice firm but burning. "Not while I draw breath, Professor. Not ever while I draw breath. What you've shared with me is not your battle alone. It is a dishonor to our entire nation. You are among thousands of heroes who constructed this nation with information and sacrifice." Ismail raised his head in shock at the intensity of his old student's eyes. "Ibrahim, I understand you care. But one person's struggle cannot be the president's top worry. You have an entire nation to govern. That is the whole idea," Traoré responded firmly. "If we can't take care of our teachers, our nurses, our farmers, the pillars of our society, then what future are we constructing for the generation that follows us?" The market became quieter, sellers hesitated mid-sale. Grayer faces smiled with recognition. Yes, that was Professor Ismail, the one who used to pack classrooms with promise. The whispers traveled fast, but Traoré was not concerned with the eyes watching him. This was not politics, this was justice. He extended his hand. Come with me. We'll discuss this somewhere nice. More importantly, we begin to repair this today. Ismail hesitated. Ibrahim, I don't want charity. Even like this, I've maintained my dignity. This isn't charity, Traoré said quietly but firmly. This is what we owe you. And every individual who laid down their life for this nation. He assisted his benefactor to his feet. The brief stroll to the presidential vehicle was like walking between two worlds, the dusty alleys in which Ismail had been lost, and a highway toward hope. Within the vehicle, the subdued whir of the motor substituted for the bustle of the market, but Traoré's thoughts were running. He wasn't just considering Ismail, he was considering each teacher, each nurse, and each public servant living the same silent existence. Where are we going? The professor whispered. To the Burkina Development Bank, Traoré responded. We're beginning a revolution, not through protest or arms, but through dignity and actual change. At the bank, Manager Musa was completing forms when his secretary burst in. Sir, the president is arriving, walking toward the entrance as I speak. Musa stood still. In 15 years as manager, he had never witnessed the president arrive unannounced. Adjusting his tie, he rushed down to the lobby. There was Traoré, standing next to a bespectacled old man in tattered clothes. Mr. President, Musa stuttered. What a pleasant surprise. How may we assist you today? Traoré's tone was tranquil yet authoritative. Mr. Musa, this is Professor Ismail Zongo, one of the finest teachers this nation has ever had. He taught me ethics and philosophy. He taught thousands of students. Ismail remained speechless, still in shock at how fast his life was transforming. Bank staff and clientele stood around them, feeling something significant. Professor Ismail has been reduced to living on the streets because his pension doesn't even meet basic needs, Traoré announced. This is intolerable, and it stops today. The room came to a standstill. Bank clerks paused in the middle of transactions. Even the sound of keyboards clicking ceased. Manager Musa stiffened, deferential but wary. Of course, Mr. President. But what are you wanting us to do? I need a dedicated fund for retired teachers and civil servants, Traoré answered without hesitation. Teachers, nurses, civil servants, anybody who has contributed to this country should never have to go through what Professor Ismail has gone through. Musa's eyebrows rose. This wasn't a gesture. This was a seismic shift in national priorities. Mr. President, he said tactfully, such an initiative will cost a lot of money and coordination between ministries. Then we begin now, Traoré interrupted. His voice did not leave any room for procrastination. Establish an emergency fund today. I want relief reaching people in 48 hours. Paperwork can wait. Our people cannot. A teenage bank clerk discreetly tilted her phone, capturing the moment. Minutes later, pictures and videos poured into social media. Hashtags spread like wildfire. In the midst of it all, Professor Ismail finally had his say. Ibrahim, I am thankful. But I cannot accept assistance unless everybody in my situation is given the same. Traoré smiled weakly, placing a hand on his teacher's shoulder. Leadership isn't about saving one person. It is about changing the system. What begins here will ripple out to thousands. Within an hour, Manager Musa came back with a plan. Mr. President, with government support we can start immediate relief. According to our records, some 3,000 retired teachers and 5,000 other government officials are eligible. Do it, Traoré instructed. And keep me posted. This isn't for headlines. It is about changing how we value the people who built this country. By the late afternoon, the protest had spilled outside of the bank. Television crews showed up. Social media overflowed with personal accounts. A retired nurse, Amana Khan, posted a tearful video testifying about training dozens of young health workers, but being unable to pay for her own medicine. A retired agricultural officer penned columns decades ago instructing farmers in new methods, only to have his own land taken away when his pension was insufficient to pay taxes. By the evening, the hashtag number Burkina Faso values was trending globally. African presidents and development specialists praised Traoré's campaign as a gold standard for combating inequality. The following morning, President Ismail stood alongside the president during a small press conference. He was dressed in clean clothes and appeared to be years younger after receiving medical treatment. His voice, previously weak, rang out with strength. "Today," he declared, "I have witnessed the values I taught my whole life: dignity, compassion, social responsibility. Become action. President Traoré has demonstrated that genuine leadership is seeing the person behind the statistics." Applause echoed. For others, this was the start of something much larger than the rescue of one man. A revolution based not on protests or politics, but on restoring dignity to those who served had started. 6 months afterward, Burkina Faso was renewed. Dignity for service was no longer a thought on paper. It was a reality. It was transforming lives daily. Fatima Ouedraogo, a retired midwife who had given birth to over 2,000 babies, now resided in a small apartment with all her medical expenses taken care of. Borma Sawadogo, a retired schoolteacher, had fixed up his old house and went back to the fields, not to make some cash, but to teach young farmers for free. And most incredible of all was Professor Ismail himself. The frail Professor Ibrahim had discovered under a baobab tree disappeared. In his place was a man reborn, bearing dignity like a torch. He was the program's de facto ambassador, going around the country to locate other unsung heroes. On a chilly December morning, he took to the national stadium stage in front of 500 teachers, health workers, and civil servants. The first ever Heroes Recognition Day. The event was so moving that countries around the region had already started emulating it. The moment Ismail approached the microphone, the stadium went quiet. 6 months ago, he started, I was invisible. Society had written me off, a burden, a relic of better times. Today, I stand before you not as a symbol of failure, but as living proof that a nation can choose compassion over indifference. The audience applauded wildly. He lifted a hand, smiling weakly, and continued. These changes did not occur because I was special. They occurred because one man, our president, recognized that leadership is not speeches or titles. It is about recognizing the humanity in every citizen. Among the front row, President Traoré experienced the same sense of pride and humility he had experienced that morning. Outside the bank, the program had exceeded statistics. It had transformed the nation's spirit. More than 8,000 retired civil servants lived with dignity. Veteran nurses lowered child mortality. Master teachers came back, raising schools to unprecedented standards. It was greater than reform. It was rebirth. But the true triumph wasn't in numbers. It was in people's hearts. Public service was no longer a neglected sacrifice, but a badge of honor. Even from overseas, the African Union hailed the program as a model for the continent, and universities in West Africa learned from it as an example of listening leadership. Professor Ismail himself was invited to address Dar es Salaam, Accra, and Lagos, on not policies, but on the human lives that had meaning behind them. In the stadium again, his voice rang with conviction. We have proven that dignity is not a luxury for the wealthy. It is the right of every citizen. We have shown that a nation's true wealth is not in its gold or its land, but in how it treats those who devoted their lives to serving others. He paused, letting silence settle over the crowd before turning his gaze toward the president. And perhaps most of all, we have demonstrated that true leadership requires something more than policy briefs and conferences. It takes the guts to walk among your people, to witness their suffering with your own eyes, and to act immediately when you encounter injustice. The stadium exploded, an ovation that was not applause, but a pledge. A pledge that this vision would last. Others came forward one by one to tell their tales. A police officer who had retired, his voice shaking, said, "For the first time in a decade, I can afford to purchase my diabetes medication. I don't have to decide whether to eat or remain alive." A former mail carrier, her vibrant dress glowing against a background of struggle for years, smiled amidst tears. "Thanks to this program, I paid my grandchildren's school fees. In the evenings, I see them studying, and I know that their future will be other than mine." A retired judge, still bearing the weight of his bench, proclaimed, I no longer don the robe, yet I still possess wisdom to share. Now that my well-being is assured, I counsel young attorneys, because justice must never retire. Their statements resonated outward, motivating students, young careerists, and citizens nationwide. Public service was no longer regarded as a chore, it was an honor. When Professor Ismail came back to the microphone to make the final address, the hall became completely silent. His words would soon appear in newspapers all over Africa. Today, he started, we mark not just those who were assisted, but a nation that chose to uphold its values. And we mark a president who demonstrated that real power is not in how much you take, but in how many you lift. As the ceremony concluded, President Traoré strode over to his former teacher. Professor, do you recall what you used to say to us? The distinction between success and significance? Ismail's warm smile reappeared, the same smile that had brightened classrooms decades before. Success, he replied, is what you do for yourself. Significance is what you do for others. Traoré's eyes welled up. Today, I get it entirely. Thank you for teaching me all those years ago and for teaching me today. They hugged as the sun descended behind Ouagadougou. The city hummed with voices, aspirations, and a new form of hope behind them. This was not just a government initiative. It was evidence that when action is guided by compassion, a whole society can be transformed. And it sent a message to the world. Beyond every policy stand human beings whose dignity must never be ignored. For it is not the walls you put up around yourselves. This is true leadership, is measured by the steps you take among your people.